the junta in Myanmar is losing its grip, and it is losing its grip fast. So there is the largest port in Myanmar that exports goods to Thailand. It is the #1 port of exporting goods from Myanmar to Thailand, which is right next to Myanmar. So obviously, not surprisingly, it is a significant trade partner for the country. And it's also one of the top 10, or roughly top 10, largest cities in the country, this port city. Well, it's fallen to the rebels, or I should say, it's about to fall to the rebels in the next 10 to 5. Honestly, it might have already fallen by the time I'm talking about it right now, but it's going to fall because the last remaining battalion in the area has capitulated. And the last pictures I saw of the soldiers was of them all kind of like huddled together under a bridge, not fighting the resistance, not running away, just kind of sitting there, almost like they were aimless, like they were just waiting for something to do or be told to surrender or be told to fight or be told of something. It just looked like they were completely unprepared. And this motivated me to make a tiny segment about it on today's stream, because I want to say before we get into the main bigger segments, which is going to be the next Ukraine one, the collapse in Myanmar is much closer than many of us realize. When the collapse happens, it's not going to be this slow grinding process, and it grinds forward, and then it reaches the precipice and boom, and then comes down, and then the rest of the government flees away. It's not going to be like that. For a while, it's going to be that grinding process. For the last year or two, it's been that grinding process. It's probably going to be that grinding process for a bit longer. But it's looking more and more like the Myanmar junta is losing its grip. And when it does, it's not going to be slow. It's going to be quick. It's going to be quick. It's going to grind forward. It's going to inch forward. And then all of a sudden, you're going to see just a wash of the junta's forces collapsing, the government collapsing, and its administration collapsing, and as the regime collapses. They're losing soldiers at a record pace. They're losing guns, munitions, artillery batteries, armored vehicles, aircraft at a record pace. They're losing territory, with over 1/3 going towards, like two-fifths. I think 40% going towards it now of the country to rebels. I think we actually have by the way, look at the weapons that they're using here. Can we look at some of these weapons? Those are SKSs. Do you see? Those are SKSs over there. And I'm not saying that an SKS can't kill a man, but that's a World War
gas
II.
Infrastructure.
What the heck?
The Biden administration came out.
How did that start playing? But that's a World War II and post-World War II weapon. Vietnam War is the last war I can think of that it was used in mass by Viet Cong guerrillas. That's the last war I could think of. And it's being used still in the same jungles, in the same region right now, not by the guerrillas. Well, the guerrillas are using it too, obviously. They're using anything they can get their hands on, but by the government trying to hold them off. This is a mismatch of different rifles, of whatever they could just scratch together. And you might be looking at this thinking, just a few years ago, I saw a lot better rifles. Just a few years ago, I saw a lot more organization. What's going on? It's because the government is getting desperate and grabbing anyone they can off the street to throw them into the armed forces to replace their losses and their high rates of desertion, with a lot of people deserting, in some instances, to literally just go join the rebels. And as they grab more people off the street and forcibly throw them into the armed forces, the character of the armed forces is going to continue to degrade as they continue to lose storehouses to rebel advances. The quality of their munitions, the quality of their weapons is going to continue to degrade. Now, look, I'm not trying to completely tell you guys that, look, the collapse of the junta is coming immediately. It's going to collapse, and revolution is going to come, and they're going to bring democracy. And there's a good chance that after the junta collapses, that the ethnic militias who have disagreements are going to start bumping heads to some degree. I hope that they're working towards. I know the PDF, the Popular Defense Forces, are trying to make a coalition that can avoid that outcome. I know that much, but whether or not they're making that coalition to try to avoid that outcome, that does not mean every single ethnic militia is going to play ball with that. That does not mean that. So this is a real issue that not only Myanmar needs to prepare for, but the rest of the world needs to prepare for. We're going to get back to that in a moment. But all trends for the junta look bad. It looks bad when it comes to the munitions they have. It looks bad when it comes to the recruits. It looks bad when it comes to captured territory, what territory they have. It looks bad when it comes to their economy. It looks bad when it comes to trade. It looks bad when it comes to foreign relations. It looks bad on every front you can think of. And I'm not saying that their fall is inevitable. There's still a lot more work for the resistance. What I am saying is that their fall looks more likely than ever. And it looks like that no matter how much they try to push that boulder up the hill, it's coming back down to crush them. It's coming back down to crush them. Now, the reason I want to emphasize this and talk about this, also, I think another way to show this point would just be to have this map on screen. Who developed this again? I think, it's Lai Mitchell. This is a map that shows the territorial control in Myanmar by rebels over the past 2 years. And so you could see how since the military coup happened that overthrew the government of Aung San Suu Kyi a few years ago, and we saw that, person doing the dance is what everybody remembers the coup for. That person doing the dance as the military vehicles go towards the capital to overthrow the government because the military, the pro-military candidates did very, very poorly in the elections. Since then, we've seen this massive gaining of ground. And you can see, this is significant. This is significant. And it's continuing to build. And what's really sucks for the government is a lot of this is in the border regions. And they need these border regions for trade, or they're going to be constrained inside, just on the coastline. They're going to be constrained to the capital, which they already largely are constrained to the capital, and to the coastline, which is not going to be good for trade with neighboring regions, trying to get supplies in. It's barreling forward the situation. I right now am doing, I guess, the Twitch or streaming equivalent of sounding the alarm, saying this crisis is coming, this crisis is coming, this crisis is coming. Expect to see this in the headlines. Mainstream media hasn't picked it up that much. I know the BBC and CNN and the MSNBC, they're not putting it as a big headline news, but the fall of this city, the fall of this region is extremely significant for the junta's long-term stability and its long-term health. And it indicates that it cannot get its grip back on the situation. And it would need drastic changes in recruitment, drastic changes in strategy, drastic changes when it comes to the structure of the government, drastic changes to its relationship with the public, drastic changes when it comes to its relationship with the ethnic minorities in the country, drastic changes when it comes to doing diplomacy with those different ethnic militias in the country to make sure that the ones that are engaged in peace agreements with them right now stay engaged. Because if the situation gets bad, I don't know if you guys know this, the junta tries to establish separate relationships with separate militias. And so there are some militias that are currently technically at peace with the junta. If the situation gets bad enough, it could quickly get much worse as those ethnic militias quickly declare war to try to grab as much land as they can because they don't want to, they don't want some of that FAFO, that fear of missing out. And then that already bad situation could instantly get much, much worse for the junta. And I'm sounding this alarm because we're not hearing a lot of coverage of this on mainstream media. And don't be surprised if all of a sudden you're going to see DW and all these other outlets talking about Myanmar much more. I'm not going to degrade DW too much on this because I know they have covered the war in Myanmar quite a lot. But I also want to sound this alarm because the international community needs to get ready for the likely scenario, and I am going to call it the likely scenario now. I'm not going to call it the inevitable scenario, but I am going to call it a likely scenario of the junta collapsing. They need to prepare to be able to mend the relationships or try to step in to help mend the relationship between the different ethnic communities so they can make some sort of unity government, which the PDF is trying to strive for, that tries to move past and, well, not really move past, but address, deal with, recognize the atrocities towards the Rohingya community and other ethnic militias, acknowledge their rights, acknowledge to some degree their amount of regional autonomy, so they can try to put an end to this violence, which has not just been going on for a few years, but in many instances, when it comes to these ethnic militias, it's been going on for decades. When a lot of these city folk for the first time went out into the countryside to fight against the militia, fight against the military, fight against the fascist junta, which overthrew the democracy, or at least a partial democracy. These were people going out to the countryside with no skills of combat, no idea how to fight a war. They had engaged in peaceful protests on the street, then were murdered by the junta or had their friends murdered by the junta. And so they went off to join the rebellion, but they had no experience. And in many instances, what they did is get trained by the other ethnic militias. And the reason why was because these ethnic militias have been fighting the junta for decades. And so they have the experience. They have the know-how of how to fight the junta. And it was that coalition building between the PDF, the National Unity Government, and a bunch of different ethnic militias. I think Operation 1025, I think it was 1037, 1020, I think it was 1027, that showed the capability of the PDF and different ethnic militias working together to conduct offensives and take territory. I don't believe the PDF was exactly involved in 1027, if I remember correctly, but they were involved in at least follow-up operations, and they do coordinate with those groups. But these different ethnic militias working together has been one of the main failing points of previous attempts to bring down the junta. Now, of course, you have much more people from the city joining the rebellion. The junta is getting a lot more desperate. It's dragging a lot more people off the street to get involved with the fight. So there's a lot of factors that are playing into why the rebels are gaining so much land and now are starting to really pick up a speed when it comes to grabbing of land. But coordination between these different groups is definitely one of the keys to their success. The fact that they could look apart, past their differences to start working together. I do got to say, though, that key to success does not stop on the battlefield. When it comes to building a post-peace Myanmar, or may I say Burma, it's also going to include these many groups working together to try to build a future for themselves and their country that is inclusive and not exclusive, which is what the military junta has tried to do towards the Rohingya Muslim minority and other ethnic groups for the entirety of their existence as a power in the country. And, of course, and this goes without saying, the military cannot retain any, and I mean any, political power if they want to avoid this type of outcome in the future. And that's what they're all trying to fight for. And they're making very clear about that from their demands. And the international community needs to start taking these rebels very, very seriously.